She said it like it was nothing, like she was reading a grocery list, like the words, "I will make your life a nightmare," were just another sentence in a conversation she had every day, which I would later find out was closer to the truth than I ever wanted to know. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. Not the morning she pulled up to my house for the third time, not the first fake violation, or the second. Let me start with the thing that made all of it matter. The reason I didn't just pack my bags and go when things got bad enough that most people would have. Let me start with my dad. Frank Webb built the front porch of our house on a weekend in late October, the year I turned 9. I remember standing beside him with a bucket of screws, handing them over one at a time like a surgical assistant who had no idea what surgery was. He wore this old grey flannel shirt he refused to throw away, paint stains on the elbow, a smear of wood stain across the cuff. He hummed while he worked. Not any song I could name, just this low, rolling sound that meant he was content. When he finished, he stood back and looked at it, with the expression I came to understand was the highest form of satisfaction my father ever showed. Quiet, steady, almost unbothered, like it was nothing, like building something with your own hands was just what a man did. "Whose porch is this?" he said without looking at me. I said, "Ours." He nodded. "Don't forget that." I never did. The house on Dellwood Avenue, 114 Dellwood, Crestfield, had been in my family for 26 years when this story begins. My parents bought it when I was 7, my father having saved for 4 years while working double shifts at the plant. My mother planted the flower beds along the front walk the spring they moved in, marigolds and black-eyed Susans, and every spring after that until she passed. My father handled everything else. The porch, the fence along the back, the stone walkway he laid himself on a Saturday afternoon while I handed him stones from a plastic bucket and pretended I was helping. After Mum died, Dad kept the flowers going. He was not a man who expressed grief through words. He expressed it through maintenance, through showing up. Every April, new seedlings. Every summer, the same careful watering, the same deadheading, the same slightly too much fertilizer that he refused to believe was too much. When Dad passed 2 years ago, a stroke, sudden, nobody's fault, just the universe deciding it was done with a good man, I moved back into 114 Dellwood. I was 31. I was teaching 3rd grade at Crestfield Elementary. I had no particular plan beyond. This was his house, now it's mine, and I am going to take care of it the way he took care of everything. I kept the flowers. I hand-watered them the same way he did. I hummed while I worked, though I couldn't have told you what song. The first time Officer Rachel Voss came to my door, I thought it was a mistake. Not a malicious one, just a clerical error, a misrouted complaint, the kind of bureaucratic hiccup that happens in small towns where the left hand and the right hand are often in entirely different zip codes. She showed me a notice about my side fence, allegedly protruding 2 inches past the property line and therefore in violation of Municipal Code 14-7B. I checked the fence. I checked the code. The fence was fine. I told her so politely and she nodded like she was listening and left. 3 weeks later, she came back. This time it was the driveway apron, allegedly cracked beyond the acceptable threshold under public right-of-way guidelines. I got on my knees with a tape measure and the city's own published guidelines pulled up on my phone. The crack was 1 centimetre wide. The threshold was 5. I told her this also. She wrote something on her clipboard. She left. I wasn't alarmed. I was mildly annoyed the way you're mildly annoyed when your cable goes out twice in a month. I chalked it up to someone in the code office with too much time and not enough to do. I found out later that I was not the first person on Dellwood to get these visits. I found out a lot of things later. The third visit happened on a Tuesday morning in August. I was watering my father's flower beds, the marigolds in full bloom, the black-eyed Susans going strong, the whole front walk smelling like summer, when I heard the sound of a cruiser turning onto Dellwood. I had learned, without meaning to, the sound of that particular engine, the way it idled, the unhurried pace of it, like something that doesn't need to hurry because it knows it will get where it's going regardless. I didn't look up right away. I kept the water running, kept the arc of it steady over the marigolds, and let myself have about 3 more seconds of a morning that was still just a morning. Birds in the oak trees, the neighbour's sprinkler 2 houses down, making that soft mechanical tick, the smell of cut grass somewhere nearby. Crestfield in August is the kind of hot that wraps around you before 8 a.m, air heavy and wet, the kind that reminds you that comfort is a recent invention. I heard the door open. I heard her footsteps on the sidewalk. I turned the hose off. Officer Rachel Voss crossed my front walk with her clipboard against her hip and her aviator sunglasses catching the morning sun. She was 27 years old, though I didn't know her age then. I just knew she was young, younger than me, and that she moved through the world with the ease of someone who had never once been made to feel like she was in the wrong place. Her uniform was pressed. Her badge caught the light. She stopped at the edge of the stone walkway, at the border between the public right-of-way and my father's property, and she looked at the house the way a person looks at something they've already decided doesn't belong to whoever's standing in front of it. "Mr. Webb," she said. "Not a question, not a greeting, a small announcement. Officer Voss." I did not smile. I'd stopped doing that after visit 2. She looked at the garden hose coiled near my feet. "That line," she said. "The way it's positioned, it's crossing the right-of-way boundary." I looked at the hose. It was lying flat in the grass, exactly where I always left it, 6 inches clear of the property line. The same 6 inches it had been on every other Tuesday morning this summer and every summer before it. "It's 14 inches from the line," I said. "City Code Article 12, Section 4 requires a minimum clearance of 6. Something moved behind her eyes. Not surprise, more like recalculation. "Move it anyway," she said. "I don't need to move it. It's compliant." She took one step closer, then another. She was standing close enough that I could see the name stitched above her badge. Voss. And the way her jaw tightened slightly when she processed something she didn't like. "Mr. Webb." Her voice dropped. Not quieter exactly, more deliberate. The way you speak to someone when you want the words to land without any possibility of misinterpretation. "I've been by here 3 times now. I've been very patient, and I'm going to be direct with you because I think you're a smart man and I don't want to waste either of our time." I didn't say anything. I held completely still. I had learned from somewhere, maybe my father, maybe just from being a black man in America long enough, that stillness was sometimes the only form of power you were allowed. "Hargrove Properties has made a very reasonable offer on this house," she said. "Twice you haven't responded. That's your right. But here's what's also true. This property has code issues. Multiple ones. And when code issues go unresolved, they get entered into the system. And when they're in the system, they generate inspections. And inspections generate findings. And findings..." She paused, tilted her head slightly. "Become the basis for proceedings. You understand what I mean by proceedings." "I want you to say it plainly," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. She looked at me for a moment, then she said it plainly. "Take the offer from Hargrove, pack up what's yours and leave, or stay. And I will make your life a nightmare until you regret every single day you decided to." She was standing 5 inches from my face when she said it. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't threatening in the way that looked like a threat from the outside. From the outside, it might have looked like a community officer having a calm conversation with a homeowner. The badge, the uniform, the clipboard, all of it said reasonable. Only the words said otherwise. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I held the hose handle in my right hand and I stood in front of my father's flowers and I looked at this woman who was 30% my age and 100% certain she had already won. "You don't have the money, the time, or the connections to fight what's coming," she said, or something like that. I've replayed it so many times since that I can't always separate what she actually said from what it felt like. What I know for certain is this. She meant every word. There was no performance in it. No bluster. Just a woman who had done this before, who knew how it ended, and who was giving me the opportunity to save us both the inconvenience of the middle part. She stepped back, she clicked her pen, she said she'd be in touch. She walked back to her cruiser without hurrying, without looking back, got in, and drove to the end of the block. I stood in the front yard for a long time after she left. Long enough for the sprinkler 2 houses down to complete a full cycle. Long enough for the temperature to tick up another degree and the birds in the oaks to settle back into their morning sounds. Long enough for my hands to stop feeling like they belonged to someone I didn't recognize. And it was in that long moment, standing in the heat on my father's stone walkway, surrounded by my mother's flowers, looking at the porch he built, that I became aware of someone across the street. She was standing on the front porch of the house directly opposite mine, 113 Dellwood. She'd moved in about 3 weeks ago, maybe 4. I'd seen the moving truck, waved once at a woman with short hair and a large German shepherd, who I'd assumed was just another new neighbour who would become, in the way of neighbours, a familiar face I never really spoke to. But she wasn't watching the street in the way neighbors watch streets. She wasn't watering something or scrolling a phone or just getting some air. She was standing with a certain intentional stillness I couldn't quite place. Her phone held at her side with the camera angled across the road. Our eyes met. She didn't look away. She didn't wave. She just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not pity, not curiosity, something more focused than either. And then she looked back down at her phone. Her dog sat at her feet. The dog was looking directly at Voss's cruiser as it rounded the corner at the far end of the block and disappeared. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know anything about her. I walked back inside my house, closed the door behind me, and stood in the hallway where the light came in through the window above the door the same way it always had. Warm and angled and familiar, the kind of light a house has when it knows you. On the wall beside the coat rack hung a framed photograph. My father, in paint-stained jeans, grinning like a man who had just finished something he was proud of. The porch visible behind him, freshly built. The flower beds in the background, newly planted. The stone walkway running to the street, still bright. He was 35 in that photo, 2 years older than I was right now. I stood there holding the frame, running my thumb along the edge of it, and for a moment I couldn't hear anything except the sound of the house around me. The soft creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the particular silence of walls that have held a family for 26 years. Whose porch is this? I pressed my palm flat against the wall. The plaster was warm. It was always warm, even in winter. My father had never explained why, and I had never asked. Ours, I thought. This is ours. From outside I heard a sound. A knock, quiet but deliberate. 3 knocks, measured and even on my front door. I looked at the photograph once more, then I turned around and went to answer it. She didn't say hello. That was the first thing I noticed. Most people, when they knock on a stranger's door for the first time, lead with something soft, a smile, an apology for bothering you, some version of hi, I'm so-and-so from down the block. The social grease that makes an unexpected visit feel less like a trespass. Dana Reeves didn't do any of that. She stood on my porch with her phone in her hand and said, I got here on the same morning she did. I need you to see something. Her dog, the big German shepherd I'd noticed before, sat behind her left heel with the kind of posture that didn't come from a pet store obedience class. His ears were high, his eyes tracked me carefully, then swept the street behind him, then came back to me, checking, measuring, deciding. He had the alert economy of something that had been trained to conserve energy for what actually mattered. I'm Marcus, I said, because one of us should try. I know, she said. Dana Reeves, across the street. Can I come in? It wasn't quite a request. It wasn't an order either. It landed somewhere in between. The tone of someone who had learned, probably through hard experience, that hesitation costs more than it saves. I stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table without being asked to sit. She placed her phone face down on the wood, then turned it over and slid it toward me. Press play, she said. The video had started before I fully registered what I was looking at, and then I did register it, and everything in my chest went very quiet. It was Voss, shot from across the street, slightly elevated, from the angle of Dana's front porch, but clear enough that I could read the name on her badge. The timestamp in the corner read 8:14 a.m. The audio was sharp, picked up cleanly, no wind distortion, no ambient interference. I watched myself standing in my own front yard. I watched Voss cross the walkway and stop. I watched the conversation play out. Every word I had said, every word she had said, rendered in clean digital audio on a stranger's kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in August. When it got to the part where Voss leaned in, I will make your life a nightmare until you regret every single day you decided to, I reached out and paused it. I sat with that for a moment. The frozen image on the screen, Voss's profile, my face, the flower beds behind us, the whole ordinary cruelty of it caught in a single frame. How long have you had the phone out? I asked. Since she got out of the car. I looked up. You knew what was going to happen before it happened. I knew what it looked like, Dana said. I've seen that approach before, the slow drive, the clipboard, the specific use of space. She folded her hands on the table. I've had a different career than most people. I noticed things. I didn't ask her what career. Something in the way she sat, spine straight, hands visible, eyes steady, told me she'd answer that question when she decided to, and not before. She's done this before, I said. Not just to me. No, Dana said. Not just to you. She told me what she'd observed in the 4 weeks since she'd moved into 113 Dellwood. She had watched Voss's cruiser on 3 separate occasions before today. 2 visits to my house, 1 to Mrs. Evelyn Brooks next door. She had watched a white sedan with a magnetic company logo drive slowly past 4 properties on the block, the driver photographing the exteriors. She had noticed the pamphlets from Hargrove Properties appearing in mailboxes. Glossy, professional, with a QR code and a phone number and the kind of language that sounds like an opportunity and reads, on closer inspection, like a countdown. She told me all of this in the even, organised way of someone recounting field intelligence. Not to impress, not to alarm, but because these were facts, and facts were what the situation required. I listened to everything. When she was done, I said, "My neighbour, Mrs. Brooks. You said Voss came to her house." "Once that I saw, maybe more before I arrived." I pushed back from the table. "I need to go talk to her." Dana nodded. She picked up her phone. She didn't offer to come with me, and I didn't ask. Some conversations need to happen without a witness. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks had lived at 112 Dellwood for 31 years. She'd raised 2 sons in that house, buried her husband in the church 2 miles up the road, and kept her front porch exactly the way it had always been. A wicker love seat, a wind chime her youngest son had brought from a trip to New Mexico, a terracotta pot of geraniums that she moved inside every October and back out every March without fail. She was 62 years old, and she made the best cornbread in Crestfield, and she had never once in her life asked anyone for anything she couldn't earn herself. She answered the door in her housecoat, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. When she saw my face, something shifted in hers. "Marcus," she said, "come in, baby." She already knew why I was there. I could tell by the way she moved, deliberately toward the kitchen table, away from the windows. She set a glass of water in front of me that I hadn't asked for. Then she sat down across from me and folded her hands. And in that moment, she reminded me so completely of my own mother that I had to look somewhere else for a second. "She's been to see you," I said. "Twice," Evelyn said. "First time was 6 weeks ago. Violations on my back deck. Said the railing height didn't meet code. I had that railing put in by a licensed contractor in 2019. She said it without anger. Just facts delivered with the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying them for too long. Second time, she brought a man with her. Said he was from the city assessor's office. He walked around the property with a measuring tape and wrote things down." She paused. "He never showed me what he wrote." "Did Hargrove Properties contact you?" She was quiet for a moment. "Evelyn, they sent a letter," she said, "about 2 weeks after the second visit. Said given the current code status of the property, they were in a position to make a cash offer that would allow me to avoid—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I didn't understand everything in the letter. My son doesn't live here anymore, and I didn't want to worry him." A cold feeling settled in my gut. "Did you sign anything?" She got up. She went to the kitchen drawer beside the stove, the one where, I knew from years of borrowing her scissors and her tape, she kept every piece of paper she couldn't quite bring herself to throw away. She came back with a document, 2 pages, stapled, Hargrove Properties letterhead at the top, a number, a price that was maybe 60% of what 112 Dellwood was actually worth. At the bottom, her signature, clear, careful in the looping cursive she'd learned in school 50 years ago. I read the language above it, preliminary agreement of intent to sell. Not a binding contract, not yet, but a first step. A door Hargrove had wedged open with everything that had come before. "You didn't know you had a choice," I said. "They made it sound like I didn't," she said. "The letter said the code process could take months and cost—" She shook her head. "I'm on a fixed income, Marcus. I can't fight a city process. I just thought—" Her voice caught for just a moment. Then she straightened her shoulders the way old women do when they have had practice at straightening their shoulders. "I thought maybe it was time." "It is not time," I said. "This isn't real. The violations aren't real. They're manufactured. All of them." She looked at me across the table for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand over mine. Her hands were dry and warm and strong. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to figure that out," I said. I called a lawyer that afternoon. His name was Gareth Okafor. He had an office on Main Street, a good reputation, had handled a property dispute for a teacher at my school a few years back. His assistant put me through to him directly. I explained the situation. I told him about the violations, about the pattern, about Voss's direct threat. I told him about Mrs. Brooks and the preliminary agreement. The line was quiet for longer than it should have been. "Who did you say the corporation was?" he said. "Hargrove Properties." Another pause. "Mr. Webb," he said, "I want to help you. I genuinely do, but I need to be honest with you. Hargrove has a retainer with 2 firms in this county and has legal resources that would make a protracted property dispute extremely costly for an individual plaintiff." He cleared his throat. "I'm not in a position to take this on right now." I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Walgreens on Mill Road for a while. The air conditioning was running, and I watched the people going in and out of the sliding doors, and I thought about what it meant that the word Hargrove could make a grown man's voice change over the phone. What it meant that I had followed every rule, cited every code, done everything right, and still found myself sitting in a parking lot with nowhere to go. My father used to say, "When a door closes, don't kick it, find the window." I drove back to Dellwood. Dana was sitting on her front porch when I got home, a laptop open on the table beside her, Ranger asleep at her feet. She watched me pull into the driveway. She didn't ask how it went. She just said, "Come look at this." She turned the laptop toward me when I sat down across from her. On the screen was a property records database, public information, the kind anyone could theoretically access, though not everyone would know where to look or what to look for. She had been cross-referencing the code inspection company that had visited my house, Redfield Municipal Services, against Hargrove's corporate filings. Redfield Municipal Services, she said, is registered in Alabama as a limited liability corporation. Its registered agent is a man named Curtis Harp. She pointed to a name on the screen. Curtis Harp also appears as a board member on 3 Hargrove Properties subsidiaries. She let that sit. The same company that flags your violations is connected, through the same man, to the company that benefits from those violations. I stared at the screen. "There's more," she said. "A housing rights watchdog group out of Montgomery published a database 6 months ago. Anonymous submissions, all code-related harassment cases in the state. I found 11 other addresses with Redfield Municipal Services in the file. 8 of them are within 2 miles of properties that Hargrove subsequently acquired." She closed the laptop. "This is a system, Marcus, not a coincidence. A machine." I had known it, somewhere underneath the anger and the fear. But there is a difference between knowing a thing and seeing it laid out in columns on a screen, seeing it with dates and names and registration numbers, seeing the machinery of it, how clean and ordinary it was, just paperwork, just filings, just a man's name in 2 databases that most people would never think to open. "Can we use this?" I asked. "As a foundation, yes, but we need more than public records. We need something that shows intent, something that connects Voss directly to Hargrove, not just the inspection company, Voss herself. And you think you can find that?" She looked at me, not with arrogance, with the particular calm of someone who has located worse things in harder places. "I'm working on it," she said. 3 days later, the city inspector showed up at my door at 9 a.m. I hadn't been given notice. There was no appointment scheduled. He was a thin man in a polo shirt with a Redfield Municipal Services lanyard around his neck, and he carried a tablet and a camera and the efficient energy of someone who already knew exactly what he was going to find before he found it. He was at my house for 45 minutes. His report arrived by email at 4:17 p.m. the same afternoon. 4 violations. 1. The soffit overhang on the east side of the structure exceeded the permissible encroachment by 3 inches. 2. The exterior electrical conduit running along the rear foundation lacked a code-compliant protective bracket at the junction point. 3. The storm drain on the east side was positioned within the setback zone, in conflict with Section 9C of the Municipal Infrastructure Code. 4. The front porch, the porch my father built with his own hands on a weekend in October, did not meet current load-bearing certification requirements and would require a structural engineer's assessment before it could be certified as compliant. 4 violations. None of them had existed 3 visits ago. All of them had materialized in 45 minutes. I sat at my kitchen table and read the email 3 times. The language was so precise, so loaded with section numbers and subclauses that it almost felt authoritative, like something real, like something I had actually done wrong. That was the point. I understood that now. The point was never to be right. The point was to be overwhelming, to flood the zone with so much paperwork, so many processes, so many numbers, that a person who was already tired and afraid and alone would do the math and decide that the fight wasn't worth it. I was a 3rd-grade teacher. I made $44,000 a year. I had a mortgage, student loans from my master's degree, and 0 appetite for a multi-front legal battle against a corporation with law firm retainers in 2 counties. I sat in my kitchen and I let that be true for a few minutes. I let myself feel the full weight of what they had built against me. Then I got up and I called my principal to arrange for a substitute the following morning because I needed a day to think. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the room I had slept in as a teenager, ceiling fan turning slow, and I thought about what my father would have done in this situation. The honest answer was that I didn't know. Frank Webb had never been confronted with exactly this. His battles had been quieter and longer and different in the way that every generation's battles are different. But I knew what he valued. I knew that he had laid every stone in that walkway himself because he believed that anything worth having was worth the work of it. I got up at 11 and went to the kitchen for water. That's when I saw it. A plain white envelope on the floor just inside the front door. Someone had slid it under the gap my father had meant to weather strip and never quite gotten around to. My name was written on the front in small, clean handwriting. No return address, no stamp. Inside, a single folded piece of paper with a note that said, "Check your email." I sent it to the address on the Crestfield Elementary Staff Directory. Dana Manila folder. I sat down at the kitchen table under the overhead light. I opened the folder. The first several pages were printed emails, thread after thread, each one with a header, a timestamp, a sender, and a recipient. The sender in most of them was an address I didn't recognize, a Hargrove Properties domain. The recipients varied. Curtis Harp at Redfield Municipal Services, a name I didn't know at a law firm, and in two of the threads, an address I recognized immediately. The same domain as the Crestfield Police Department. The emails were direct, clinical, almost businesslike in the way that made them more disturbing, not less. Property at 114 Dellwood, third visit recommended. Owner is unresponsive to standard outreach. Escalate per Phase 2 protocol, and then confirmed. Officer R. Voss will proceed on Tuesday. And then the reply, perfect. Keep us updated on timeline. Officer R. Voss, in writing, in a Hargrove Properties email thread. I turned the page. There were more addresses, more threads, more names I'd have to look up. Dana had flagged certain lines with a yellow highlighter. The picture that emerged was not complicated. It was just large. Voss wasn't acting alone. The inspector wasn't acting alone. There was a coordinator on Hargrove's side who was managing the timeline, the sequence of visits, the escalation path. It had been done before on other streets with other people. The emails referenced 3 previous addresses where the process had been completed, meaning presumably that someone had taken the offer and left. I turned to the last page, and I stopped. It was a document on Hargrove Properties letterhead, a sale authorization form, the kind that initiates a formal purchase offer and begins the transfer of property rights. It was for 114 Dellwood Avenue, my house. At the bottom of the form, in the signature line designated for the current property owner, was a name written in blue ink of Frank R. Webb. My father's full name, his handwriting, or something close enough to it that in the wrong light you might not look twice. The date typed beside the signature, April 14th. I turned back to the folder cover and checked the note Dana had written. I looked at the date. I looked at the signature date again, April 14th. My father had been dead for 7 months before that date. I sat at my kitchen table at midnight with my hands flat on the folder and the overhead light buzzing slightly and the house entirely still around me, and I could not make a sound. Not from grief, not from anger, though both were there, moving through me like water finding cracks. I couldn't make a sound because the thing in front of me was so complete, so brazen, so utterly sure of itself that it had taken my voice somewhere I couldn't immediately reach. They had forged a dead man's signature. They had used my father's name, the name of a man who had spent 26 years building something real and good and lasting, who had hummed while he worked and pressed his palm to warm plaster and told me never to forget what was mine. And they had written it on a document that was designed to take everything he had left me. I sat there a long time. Then, very slowly, I picked up my phone. I opened my email. Dana's message was there as she had said it would be. Subject line, read the folder first, then read this. I read it. She had written 3 sentences. I know what you're feeling right now. Don't make any calls tonight. I'll be at your door at 7. I want to tell you what it feels like to look at your dead father's signature on a piece of paper he never touched. It doesn't feel like anger, not at first. Anger is loud. Anger moves. What I felt sitting at that table in the deep quiet of midnight was something altogether different. A kind of stillness so complete, It almost felt like peace. Until you looked closer and realized it was the stillness of a person who has just witnessed something the mind refuses to accept on first contact. The brain's version of a traffic stop. Wait here, I need to process this. Frank R. Webb. In blue ink on a Hargrove Properties sale authorization form, dated April 14th, a date that arrived on the calendar 7 months after my father was lowered into the ground at Mount Calvary Baptist Church in the presence of 43 people who had loved him, including me. I sat with that document until nearly 2 in the morning. I didn't pace. I didn't make calls. I did what Dana had told me to do, and I waited because something in her 3-sentence email, "I know what you're feeling right now," had the weight of experience behind it. The weight of someone who had been in rooms with hard information before and understood that the first hour with it was not the hour for decisions. At one point, I got up and walked to the living room. I sat in the armchair by the window, my father's chair, the one he'd had reupholstered twice because he couldn't bring himself to replace it. I looked at the street through the glass, dark and quiet, the oak trees barely moving, the porch light at 113 Dellwood still on. I thought about my father, not the signature, not the document, just him, the specific weight of his silence when he was thinking something through, the way he would sit with a problem like it was a physical object he was turning over in his hands. He was not a dramatic man. He was not a man who raised his voice or made big speeches. He solved things methodically, incrementally, with the patient confidence of someone who trusted that the right answer would show itself if you stayed at the table long enough. Stay at the table, I thought. I went to bed at 1:45. I set an alarm for 6:30. I slept about 2 hours. Dana arrived at 7 on the dot, not at 7:02, not at 6:58. 7 exactly, like a person who had decided on a time and treated that decision as a contract with herself. I had the door open before she finished knocking. 2 knocks, different rhythm than the night before, like even small signals were something she varied deliberately. Ranger came in ahead of her, moving with the efficient sweep of a dog who had cleared more important rooms than a teacher's living room in Crestfield, Alabama. He did a quiet circle, then settled near the front hallway, watching the door. Dana sat in the chair across from mine at the small table near the kitchen window. Not the kitchen table, which was where the folder still sat, open, the last page face up. She didn't look at it. She looked at me. "Did you sleep?" she said. "Enough," I said, which was not strictly true, but was the kind of answer you give when what's true doesn't matter right now. "Okay." She set her own folder on the table, thinner than the one she'd left under my door, but dense with what turned out to be the key to everything. "Here's what I know about the signature." She explained it methodically, no preamble, no softening. A man named Gerald Pruitt worked as a notary public operating out of a storefront on Highway 9 in Crestfield, the kind of notary office that handles routine paperwork, car titles, affidavits, the everyday bureaucratic business of a small town. He had been a licensed notary for 11 years. He also appeared, Dinah had discovered through a combination of public records and a housing fraud database maintained by a non-profit in Birmingham, on 6 other real estate documents across 2 counties, all involving properties that had been recently sold or were in the process of being sold under duress. In 3 of those cases, the named seller had deceased at the time of signing. "He fabricates the signature," Dinah said. "Pruitt. Then he notarizes his own fabrication and enters it into the record like any legitimate document. Because it looks official, because it's notarized, because most people don't think to cross-reference death certificates with property filings. It goes through." I stared at her. "People know about him. The non-profit knows. They've submitted reports. Nothing has moved." Her voice stayed even. "Pruitt has a relationship with someone in the county clerk's office that's been difficult to prove." She paused. "Until now." "What changed?" "We have a paper trail that connects Pruitt to Hargrove through Curtis Harp at Redfield Municipal Services. It's in the folder I left you, the 3rd email chain, page 11. The same man who coordinates the fake inspections coordinates the document filings. It's the same operation, Marcus. Different mechanisms, same machine." I thought about what she had told me 2 days earlier. This is a system, not a coincidence. A machine. I had understood it intellectually then. Now I understood it the way you understand a broken bone, not from a diagram but from the specific weight of it in your body. You said last night you'd contacted someone, well, I said, federally. She nodded once. HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. I sent them an initial package 4 days ago. The public records, the email chains, the corporate cross-references. They acknowledged receipt. They're building a case of their own across 3 counties. She looked at me carefully. Your evidence, the forged signature on a deceased person's behalf, that's the kind of thing that elevates this from a local housing complaint to federal document fraud. It changes the scope of what they can pursue. The word fraud landed differently than it would have before that night. Before, it had been an abstract, a category, and now it had my father's name on it. You're telling me I need to go federal, I said. I'm telling you that you have the option, and that it's a real one. She held my gaze. But you have to decide if you're willing to go that far. It won't be fast, it won't be quiet, and until it resolves, you're going to be under more pressure, not less. I thought of Evelyn Brooks at her kitchen table, her hands over mine, asking what I was going to do. There are other people on this street, I said. If what happened to me and Evelyn is part of the same machine, then there are other people it's happened to. Almost certainly, Dinah said, which is why, before you call anyone, I want you to do something first. She reached across the table and turned the folder to face her. She flipped to a page near the back, a map printout of Dellwood Avenue with 5 addresses circled in red ink. These are the properties on this block that have received Redfield Municipal Services inspection reports in the last 8 months, she said. 2 of them have Hargrove preliminary agreements on file in the county records. One of them shows a sale in escrow. She tapped the map. The sale in escrow is 108 Dellwood. I knew 108 Dellwood, the Pattersons, retired couple, early 70s. Calvin Patterson had coached Little League for 15 years. His wife Ruth Ann had brought food to my door the week my father died without being asked and without making a thing of it. They're selling, I said. Or being sold, Dana said. I spent the rest of that morning going door to door on Dellwood Avenue. I want to be honest about what that was like because people talk about community organizing like it's this natural, spontaneous thing, like neighbors just gather around a common cause because their hearts are in the right place. The truth is messier. Some people don't open their doors. Some people open them and then close them when they hear what you're saying. Some people are so worn down by what's been done to them that they can't afford, emotionally or practically, to believe that something can change. I knocked on 5 doors that morning. Calvin and Ruth Ann Patterson were the second door. I showed them the folder, the email chains, the corporate records, the Redfield Municipal Services connection to Hargrove. Calvin sat very still through most of it. He was a big man with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, and he read every page I put in front of him with the deliberate care of someone who had spent a lifetime doing things the right way and could not quite accept that the right way had been gamed around him. When he got to the part about the sale currently in escrow, his sale, his house, he took his glasses off and set them on the table. We didn't want to go, Ruth Ann said. She said it simply, plainly, the way you say something when you've been holding it for so long that saying it out loud is almost a relief. We just thought we didn't have a choice. Third door James Whitfield, 45, on disability following a warehouse injury, who had been told his carport violated setback requirements and faced fines of $400 per week until he complied or sold. He had 3 weeks of notices stacked on his kitchen counter. He hadn't told his daughter, who lived in Memphis. He was 3 notices away from the point where the weekly fines would start threatening the mortgage. Fourth door, no answer, though I knew someone was home. I slid a note under the gap and moved on. Fifth door, an older woman named Barbara Jean Mosley, who answered immediately, who turned out to have already tried to report the inspection process to the city, or ICE, and had received form letter responses both times. She was the one who said what everyone else had been thinking. You think it matters what we say? To who? To a federal agency, I said. It matters to them. She looked at me through the screen door. She looked down at the folder in my hands. She pushed the door open. Dana came with me to Evelyn's house that afternoon. Not because I asked. She was on her porch when I crossed back from the Pattersons, and she fell into step beside me without a word, Ranger moving quietly at her left. I didn't stop her. There are moments when another person's presence says something your words can't, and this was going to be one of those moments. Evelyn let us in. She saw Dana and looked at me with a brief question in her eyes, and I said, "She's on our side." And Evelyn nodded the way a woman nods when she has decided to extend trust on the strength of the person asking. I placed the folder on her coffee table. I turned to the last 2 pages. "Evelyn," I said, "I need you to look at something and tell me if you recognize the name." She leaned forward, reading glasses on, and looked at the document I opened to. It was not my father's sale authorization. I had found this one in Dinah's thin folder from that morning, a property transaction record pulled from county filings. 108 Dellwood, 110 Dellwood, and, on the 3rd page, 112 Dellwood. The preliminary agreement Evelyn had signed, her name at the bottom, her careful cursive. But above it, on the line marked witness/co-consenting party, a line she had never mentioned, a line I was not sure she had read closely, was another name. Also in blue ink. Also in a script that approximated a signature without quite being one. Robert L. Brooks. Her husband's name. Robert Brooks had been gone for 9 years. Evelyn went very still. I had steeled myself to watch her fall apart, and I was ready for that, ready to hold whatever she needed to put down. But Evelyn Brooks did not fall apart. What she did was something I have thought about many times since. She looked at that name, that ghost of a signature, for a long time, and then she pressed her lips together in a way that was not sadness, but something past it. Something on the far side of grief that looks almost like resolution. "They used Robert," she said. "Yes," I said, they used a dead man to take my home." "They tried," I said. "They haven't taken it yet." She looked up from the paper and looked at me. Not at Dana, not at the folder, directly at me. And for a second she was every woman I had ever known who had been required to be stronger than anyone had the right to ask. "What do we do?" she said. "We give everything we have to the federal agency," I said. "All of it. Every document, every name, every date. We make them look, and we do it together so it isn't just one person they can dismiss." Dana spoke for the first time since we'd come inside. "Your preliminary agreement is not binding," she said to Evelyn. "It has no legal force. And a document with a forged signatory is not a document. It's evidence of fraud." She said it quietly, but each word was distinct and fully formed, the way someone speaks when they want to be certain they're understood. "Your house is yours, Mrs. Brooks." Evelyn sat with that. Then she said, "You want some coffee?" We spent 4 days building the package for HUD. I called in 2 personal days from school and sat at Dana's kitchen table. Her table, not mine, for reasons neither of us commented on. Going through everything, every document, every email, every address. Dana organized. I wrote the personal testimony, dates, times, the content of each conversation with Voss, the sequence of inspections, the receipt of the sale authorization with my father's forged name. I wrote it like a teacher, clearly, linearly, with nothing assumed. The way you write something when you need a stranger to understand it on first read. Calvin Patterson brought his full stack of Redfield Municipal Services reports and a voicemail he had saved from a Hargrove representative, the one where the man said, in a tone designed to sound helpful, that given the current inspection status of the property, they would be in a position to move quickly on a cash offer. Barbara Jean Mosley brought her 2 form letter city responses, which were now evidence of a different kind. A municipality that had received complaints and done nothing. James Whitfield sat at Dana's kitchen table on the second afternoon and went through his notices one by one, while Dana photographed each one with careful, exact framing. Ranger lay in the corner of the kitchen through all of it. He seemed to understand that what was happening at that table required concentration, and he respected that the way a well-trained creature respects the particular quality of human effort. On the 4th evening, Dana sent the package. I sat beside her while she did it, watched her attach the files, review the summary document, verify the recipient address, and hit send. It was less dramatic than it deserved to be. A click, an email client cycling, a confirmation screen. "That's it," Calvin said from across the table. "That's the beginning," Dana said. The confirmation from HUD's regional field office came 48 hours later. A case number, an assigned investigator, a request for supplemental materials which Dana had anticipated and already prepared. And then we waited. I went back to teaching. I stood in front of 22 third graders and taught them long division and the water cycle and the correct use of a semicolon, which at least one of them, a girl named Imani, had decided to deploy in every single sentence regardless of context. And I tried to carry both things at once without letting one collapse the other. Most days I managed it. Some days I sat at my desk during lunch with the door closed and stared out the window at the parking lot and thought about my father and the folder and the weight of the thing we had set in motion. I don't know exactly what Voss knew about the federal filing, but I know that 7 days after we sent that package, she came back to Dellwood, not to my door first, to Evelyn's. I was carrying grocery bags from my car when I saw the cruiser. I stopped at the end of my driveway. I watched Voss get out. The same deliberate pace, the same clipboard, the same easy confidence that she was the most consequential person on this particular block. She went to Evelyn's door and knocked. I set my bags down on the driveway. I took out my phone, I opened the camera and pressed record. Evelyn opened the door. I could see her profile from where I stood. She had her arms crossed, chin level, the posture of a woman who was not going to be moved today or any other day. Voss spoke. I was too far to hear the words, but I could see the body language. The clipboard raised, the point at something on the property, the particular angling in that I recognized from my own front yard 6 weeks ago. Evelyn shook her head. Voss said something else. Evelyn shook her head again. Then Evelyn said something back. I could not hear it, but I saw Voss go still. Not the calculated stillness of a person in control, the involuntary stillness of someone who has just heard something they weren't expecting, something that changed the air. Voss stepped back. She looked down the street, and for a second, her eyes landed on me. Standing in my driveway, phone raised, recording. She held my gaze for a moment, then she walked back to her cruiser. I should have known she wouldn't go quietly. People who have operated without consequence for a long time don't suddenly discover restraint because the ground has started shifting. They double down. They accelerate. They decide that if the system they've been abusing is about to turn on them, they'd better use it as much as possible before it does. 3 days later, a formal eviction notice arrived for 114 Dellwood Avenue. Not a violation warning, not a code letter, an eviction notice, meaning the city, allegedly acting on the accumulated code status of the property and the forged sale authorization in its system, was initiating formal proceedings to compel me to vacate. It was delivered by hand, by Voss herself at 9 a.m. on a Thursday. She came up the walk with the paperwork visible, held at her side, not quite concealed, not quite displayed, the way you carry something when you want the person to see it coming. Her uniform was pressed. Her face carried an expression I had come to recognize over the past weeks, the look of someone who has decided they have already won and is performing the formality of the final move. She didn't make it to my door. Dana stepped off the porch of 113 Dellwood before Voss reached the midpoint of my front walk. She came across the street with the unhurried directness of someone moving on purpose, Ranger at her left heel, head low, the slow, deliberate tracking gait he used when he had assessed something as a threat and was waiting for the word. Voss stopped. She looked at Dana. She looked at Ranger. Something recalibrated briefly behind her eyes, but she recovered it quickly and settled her expression back into its practiced blankness. "Civilian," Voss said, "I'm serving a notice. I need you to step aside." "I know what you're serving," Dana said. She was standing at the edge of my front walk, not blocking Voss's path exactly, just present. Occupying space with a completeness that made the air around her feel different. Her phone was in her right hand, recording. "I want to make sure you know that it doesn't change what's already in motion." Voss's jaw shifted. "I don't know what you think you're—" "The package went to HUD's regional field office 8 days ago," Diana said. "The email chains, the Redfield Municipal Services cross-reference, the Pruitt notary connection, the forged signature on a sale authorization bearing the name of a man who died 7 months before that document was dated." She paused. No drama in it, just information, delivered at the pace of someone who had briefed people in harder circumstances than a sidewalk in Crestfield. "They've assigned an investigator. There's a case number." Another pause. "I have it, if you'd like it." Silence. The street was entirely still. No sprinklers, no passing cars, no ambient morning sound that I could register. Just the two of them standing in the August heat, and Ranger watching Voss with the focused, patient attention of something that has learned to distinguish between threats that retreat and threats that don't. Voss looked down at the papers in her hand. She looked up at Dana. She looked past Dana at me. I was standing in my open doorway now, having come to the threshold the moment I'd seen Dana cross the street. My own phone recording, watching this play out from the porch my father built. And then Voss did something I had not fully expected. She smiled. Not the flat manufactured version I'd seen before. Something sharper than that, something that had a real edge to it. The smile of a person who has decided that what's coming doesn't scare them yet, or who has decided that fear is not something they're going to show. "Good for you," she said to Dana softly. "Good for all of you." She looked back at me. "None of that changes what's in the system. The process is already running. You understand how municipal proceedings work, Mr. Webb? Once they're initiated, they run on their own timeline. Federal investigations take months. City processes take weeks." She held up the papers. "This is weeks." She walked to my door. I didn't move from the threshold. She held the papers out. I took them because not taking them didn't change what they were. "You'll want to look at the timeline on page 3, she said pleasantly, like she was recommending a restaurant. "You have 30 days to vacate or contest. Contesting requires a hearing, and hearing dates are set by the court administrator's office, which is currently running a 6-week backlog." She tilted her head. "Just so you have the full picture." She went back down the walk. She got in the cruiser. She drove to the end of the block, signaled correctly. That detail lodged in my brain for some reason, the exact precision of someone who knows they're being watched. And turned the corner. Dana came to the porch. She stood beside me and looked at the papers in my hand. I turned to page 3. The 30-day clock, the 6-week backlog, the math of it. Clean, deliberate, designed. I looked up at the street. Empty now, the oaks motionless in the heat. 108 Dellwood, where Calvin and Ruth Ann Patterson had spent 15 years coaching kids and bringing food to grieving neighbours. 112 Dellwood, where Evelyn Brooks was standing at her own door now, watching from across the yard. I did not feel hopeless. I want to be clear about that. I did not feel the heavy animal exhaustion of a person who has run out of options. What I felt was something more specific, something that sat in my chest like a coal. Not burning, not yet, but hot, getting hotter, needing only the right kind of air. I had the testimony of 5 neighbours. I had the email chains. I had the corporate records. I had a federal case number and an assigned investigator and a package that was already in the hands of people whose job it was to care about exactly this. What she had given me was 30 days and a 6-week backlog. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know yet, was that the investigator had already called. My phone had rung that morning at 7:40 a.m. I'd let it go to voicemail because I hadn't recognised the number. I'd listened to the message on my way to the door when I saw the cruiser pull up. I looked down at my phone now. The voicemail notification still there, uncleared, the number showing a 334 area code. The eastern portion of the state. Government offices. Federal Regional District. The investigator had a question about one of the documents. A routine follow-up. Could I call back at my earliest convenience? I looked at Dana. She was looking at my phone. She had seen me look at it. "That call you got this morning," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said. She exhaled through her nose, almost, but not quite, a sound of relief, more the sound of someone whose math has just been confirmed. I looked back at the eviction notice in my left hand. Page 3, 30 days. Then I looked at the phone in my right. I pressed call back. Nobody tells you what it sounds like when justice actually picks up the phone. I had spent weeks imagining the kinds of conversations that were going to define this fight. The confrontations with Voss, the conversations with neighbours too afraid to hope, the arguments I would never get to make in a courtroom that was already backlogged by 6 weeks. I had been steeling myself for a long war, for forms and delays and the particular grinding patience required of people who are right but outgunned. I was not prepared for a woman named Sandra Okafor at the HUD Regional Field Office to answer on the second ring, introduce herself by name and title, and say, in a tone that was professional and warm in equal measure, "Mr. Webb, I'm glad you called back. We need to talk about Gerald Pruitt." She was not a woman who wasted time on pleasantries, and I respected that immediately. She had been an investigator with HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity for 11 years. She told me this not as a credential but as context, because what she said next required me to understand that she was not new to this, and what she had found was not routine. Hargrove Properties had been on the office's radar since the previous year. There were complaints from 2 other counties, the same pattern. Municipal code violations appearing in clusters around targeted properties, cash offers arriving shortly after, sales closing at below market rates. The agency had pieces but not the connective tissue. The case had stalled at the point where stalled cases live, enough to believe something was wrong, not enough to prove it cleanly. Our package had changed that. "The Pruitt documents are the piece we needed," she said. "A notarized forgery on a deceased person's behalf is federal document fraud. Once we have that, we can compel records from the county clerk's office, including communications with Redfield Municipal Services. That opens the inspection side." She paused briefly. "The forged signature on your property, your father's name. That's the clearest example in our file. It's dated, it's documented, and the death record is a matter of public record. There's no ambiguity." I was standing on my porch. Dana was beside me. The eviction notice was still in my left hand, the edges slightly bent from where I had been gripping it. I looked at it while Sandra Okafor spoke, and for the first time since it had been handed to me, it did not feel like the most powerful piece of paper on the block. What happens to the eviction proceeding? I asked. That's the next call I'm making, she said. When a property is the subject of an active federal fair housing investigation, a municipal eviction proceeding tied to the same conduct cannot proceed independently. We'll be contacting the city attorney's office this afternoon. The proceeding will be suspended pending our investigation. She said it the way people say things they have said many times before, not casually, but with the precision of someone for whom these words have real, practiced weight. You are not going to lose your home, Mr. Webb. I didn't say anything for a moment. I heard Dana exhale slowly beside me. There's one more thing I need from you, Sandra Okafor said. The other residents on your block, the ones who gave testimony in the package. I'd like to speak with each of them directly, with your permission to make the initial introduction. They'll want to hear from you, I said. Good, she said. I'll reach out this week. We said goodbye. I lowered the phone. The street was quiet. Dellwood Avenue in the late morning, everything where it had always been. The oaks, the houses, the carefully kept yards of people who had lived here long enough that the word neighborhood had actual content. 112 Dellwood, where Evelyn was probably at her kitchen window right now. 108 Dellwood, where Calvin and Ruth Ann Patterson had been one signature away from losing a home they'd lived in for 15 years. The fourth door that never opened. I folded the eviction notice in half, then in half again, then I put it in my back pocket. She's suspending the proceeding, I said to Dana. Dana looked at me for a moment. Then she said, okay, just that. Okay. Like a person checking something off a list they had always believed they would get to the end of. The next 2 weeks moved the way things move when institutions finally start doing their jobs. Not dramatically, not in ways you'd recognize from television, but steadily, incrementally, with the quiet weight of consequence. On a Tuesday, a letter from the city attorney's office arrived confirming the suspension of eviction proceedings for 114 Dellwood. The language was formal and gave nothing away, but the thing it meant was simple. They had been told to stop, and they had stopped. On a Thursday, the Crestfield Police Department announced that Officer Rachel Voss had been placed on administrative suspension pending a departmental review. The announcement was 2 sentences on the city's website, 2 sentences that had taken 6 weeks and 5 neighbours and a federal investigation to produce. I read them 3 times anyway. On the following Monday, a notice appeared in the County Property Records database. Hargrove Properties pending acquisition of 108 Dellwood. The Patterson house, Calvin and Ruth Ann's house, had been placed under federal hold pending investigation. The sale in escrow was suspended. The house was theirs. I called Calvin Patterson when I saw that notice. He answered on the first ring. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, the particular breathing of someone who is deciding whether they're going to let themselves feel something they've been afraid to feel. Ruth Ann, he said, away from the phone. Not calling her, just saying her name the way you say someone's name when you need them to know something without having to find the words for it yet. I stayed on the line until he came back. Marcus, he said. Yeah, I said, thank you, son. I didn't trust my voice for a second. Don't thank me, I said when I had it back. Thank your neighbours. Evelyn's preliminary agreement with Hargrove Properties was formally voided the same week, nullified on the basis that it contained a fraudulent co-signatory, which rendered it without legal standing. The letter from her attorney, pro bono through a fair housing organisation that Sandra Okafor had connected her with, arrived on a Friday. Evelyn called me. She read the relevant paragraph out loud, carefully, like she wanted to make sure the words were real. The document in question is hereby declared null and void. The property at 112 Dellwood Avenue, Crestfield, Alabama, remains in sole ownership of Evelyn May Brooks. Sole ownership, she said. Yes, ma'am. A long pause, then, Marcus, I'm going to need you to give me a minute. Take all the time you need, I said. She called back 40 minutes later to tell me her son Marcus, her younger son, also named Marcus, a fact I had somehow never known in 26 years of being her neighbour, was driving up from Birmingham the following weekend. She said she was going to make cornbread and that I was expected. I told her I would be there. Word got to the school the way things get to small schools in small towns, not through any official channel, but through the particular osmosis of people who talk to each other at pickup lines and in parking lots and over the phone in the evenings. My principal, a careful and deliberate man named Mr. Osei, called me into his office on a Wednesday afternoon and asked me, with the measured consideration he brought to everything, if the situation had resolved. I told him it was resolving. He looked at me across his desk for a moment. Then he said, "I want you to know that you have the full support of this staff." He said it simply and directly, the way he said everything. I realize I should have said that sooner. I'm saying it now. I thanked him and went back to my classroom. My 22 third graders were in the middle of a reading period, which meant that a certain percentage of them were reading and a certain percentage of them were doing things that they hoped I would not notice. I stood at the door for a moment before they saw me watching them. Deshawn at the second table from the left, deeply absorbed in his book. Imani adding a semicolon to something on her worksheet with visible satisfaction. A boy in the back whose name was Tyler and who had been trying to build a small tower out of eraser caps since September. These were 8-year-olds. They came to school every day in the middle of lives I only partially understood, carrying things I only partially saw, and they sat in front of me for 7 hours and trusted me to give them something worth knowing. I had almost let someone take the house I drove home to from this classroom every day. I walked to the front of the room. 22 heads came up. "Close your books," I said. "I want to talk to you." I did not tell them everything. They were 8. There are things 8-year-olds should not have to know about the ways adults can fail them or each other. But I told them something true. I told them that I had gone through a hard time over the past couple of months, and that it had made me think about what home means. Not the building, but the feeling, the people, the idea that certain places carry the people who love them, even after those people are gone. Deshawn, who sat at the second table from the left and who had a few months earlier told the class about his great-grandmother's house in the same matter-of-fact way children describe the most sacred things, raised his hand. "Mr. Webb, is your house okay?" I looked at him for a moment. This boy and his 8 years of life and his complete sincerity, asking the only question that had ever really mattered in all of this. "Yes," I said, "it's okay." "Good," he said, and went back to his book, apparently satisfied in the way of children who ask questions because they genuinely want answers and are perfectly capable of accepting them. I heard 1 or 2 of the others make small sounds, the collective third-grade version of exhaling, like they had been carrying something small on my behalf without quite knowing it. I turned back to the board. I wrote the day's lesson on it. I taught for the rest of the afternoon without my voice breaking, which I will count, to this day, as one of the quieter achievements of my life. 3 weeks passed. The investigation continued, slowly, as Sandra Okafor had warned, with the institutional rhythm of something built to be thorough rather than fast. There were follow-up requests for documents. There were phone calls I returned promptly and things I was asked to wait on and things I could not yet know. Gerald Pruitt, the notary, was suspended by the state licensing board pending investigation. The county clerk, whose office had accepted his fraudulent filings for years, was the subject of a separate inquiry. Hargrove Properties went quiet, not apologetically quiet, the particular silence of a large organisation that has been caught doing something it intends to deny, conserving itself for the legal process ahead. Their names stopped appearing in mailboxes on Dellwood Avenue. The white sedan with the magnetic logo stopped driving slowly past the houses. The street itself changed. I noticed it first in the mornings, the way I noticed most things. In the space before the day fully started, when you're still close enough to sleep that your observations haven't yet been organised into language. The quality of the silence was different, not the held-breath quiet of people waiting for the next bad thing, something looser than that, something that had put its weight down. Evelyn was back on her front porch most mornings by 7, coffee cup in hand, watching the street the way she had for 30 years before fear drove her inside. She had put new geraniums in the terracotta pot. One morning I walked out to get my mail and she lifted her cup toward me from across the yard, a small, easy gesture, and I lifted my hand back, and that was the whole conversation, and it was enough. Small handmade signs began appearing in windows on the block. Not organised, not coordinated, just the individual choices of people deciding to say something. A piece of cardstock in Barbara Jean Mosley's front window, not for sale. A larger piece of poster board in the Patterson's bay window, in what I recognised as Ruth Ann's handwriting, "We are still here." One morning, walking back from the mailbox, I noticed a sign in the window of the 4th door, the one that had never opened for me that day I went door to door. 2 words written in blue marker on a sheet of notebook paper, still standing. I stood on the sidewalk and read it for a moment. Then I went inside. The Saturday that Dana left, I had not been told she was leaving. I found out the way I found out most things about Dana Reeves, by watching. I was at the kitchen window with my coffee, a Saturday morning habit, the one with no alarm and no lesson plans, when I saw the green truck pull up to 113 Dellwood. Not a moving company, a rented flatbed, the kind you drive yourself. She had backed it into the driveway, which I noted was exactly the practical, no-fuss approach of someone who had loaded and unloaded their life before and had no illusions about what it required. I set my cup down. I watched her carry boxes for a while, the economy of it. Nothing wasted, no second trips where one would do. Ranger supervised from the porch, ears up, tracking each trip with the attentive interest of a dog who understood logistics. I knew this was coming, not because she'd told me, because of the way she'd spoken about Virginia once, briefly in passing, in the specific shorthand of a person for whom a place means obligation rather than just geography, because of the way she had never, in all the weeks of this, suggested she was staying. Because some people move through your life with a completeness that makes it obvious, if you're paying attention, that they were always passing through. I opened my mother's recipe box. My mother's handwriting on the recipe cards was the kind that belonged to a person who had been taught to write beautifully and had never stopped. Even the abbreviations had a particular grace. Tablespoon with a small curving stem, pinch with a deliberate little loop. Most of the cards in the box I had made before, but one of them I had only made twice. Sweet potato pie, her version. The one she never wrote down completely because she said the most important instructions couldn't be written. The ones that lived in your hands, the ones you only understood by standing beside someone who already knew. I had stood beside her often enough. I made it the way she taught me, slowly with attention, tasting as I went, adjusting without measuring because she had been right that some things can't be measured. The kitchen filled with the smell of it, warm and spiced and specific, the smell of every important occasion in my childhood, the smell of her saying this matters. She had made this for her mother's 85th birthday and for the first Thanksgiving my parents spent in this house, and for my father on the day he retired. Those were the only times until I started making it. Once for my father's birthday after she was gone, once for a friendship that had become something I wasn't sure I had a name for, and now a third time for a woman I owed more than I could calculate and could repay only imperfectly with the best thing I had. She was adjusting something in the truck bed when she heard me cross the street. She turned before I said anything, the way she always turned, the awareness of space around her that was so deeply habitual it had stopped registering as unusual. She looked at what I was carrying, then at my face. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "My mother made this for people who mattered to her," I said. I held it out to her. So, she took it, both hands, careful, the way the weight of something tells you it's not just about the object. She looked down at it for a moment, that fraction of unguarded expression I'd seen on her face exactly once before, the night she'd explained the Pruitt connection, and something had moved across her features that was too honest to be anything but real feeling, held briefly and then released. Ranger materialized from the porch and arranged himself between us with his chin raised and his eyes on the dish, every inch the professional making a thorough assessment. "That's not for you," Dana said without looking at him. The sound that came out of me was a laugh, real and sudden and unannounced, the kind that catches you off guard in the way that the best ones do. It felt like something unlocking. I looked at her. "Thank you," I said, "for all of it. I know it doesn't cover it." "It doesn't need to cover it," she said. She said it plainly, the way she said most true things, with no decoration, as if decoration would dilute it. "You did the hard part. You stayed." I thought about my father in his armchair, about staying at the table, about the patience of a man who trusted that the right answer would show itself. "He would have liked you," I said. She looked at me steadily. "He raised somebody good," she said. "That tells me enough." Evelyn appeared on her porch, not intruding, just present, the way neighbors are present when something important is happening and they don't want to interrupt, but they don't want to miss it either. She lifted her coffee cup in the slow, dignified way of a woman who has earned the right to make even small gestures ceremonial. Dana looked across the street and gave a single nod. Evelyn nodded back. She loaded the last 2 boxes. She called Ranger in and settled him in the passenger seat, where he arranged himself with the self-satisfied solidity of a dog who has completed his assignment and is ready for the next one. She closed the door. She stood beside the truck for a moment, one hand on the roof, and looked at 114 Dellwood the way a person looks at a place before they leave it. trying to compress it into something carryable. Then she got in, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. I stood at the edge of the road and watched the green truck move down Dellwood Avenue, past the oaks, past the houses with their small handmade signs in the windows, past the corner where Voss's cruiser had turned so many times, like a metronome counting down to something that never came. At the stop sign at the far end of the block, the truck paused. Then it turned and was gone. The street settled back into itself. Saturday morning sounds returned, the particular ordinary music of a neighborhood that is alive and intends to stay that way. A screen door somewhere. A lawnmower a few blocks over, someone who had decided this was the day. A kid on a bicycle wobbling around the far cul-de-sac with the focused incompetence of someone who is about 5 minutes from getting it right. I walked back up the front path, every stone still exactly where my father placed it. I put my hand on the doorframe before I went in, not dramatically, not because I had planned to, just because it was there and it was solid and it was mine, and sometimes the right response to a thing that has stayed standing is to simply acknowledge it. To say, I see you, I see what it took. I pushed the door open and went inside. I've thought a lot about what this story means, not the big picture version, but not the story of Hargrove Properties and Gerald Pruitt and the investigation that eventually resulted in charges I won't know the final outcome of for another year at least. I mean the smaller, more specific story. The one that lives on one block in one town and started with a woman carrying a clipboard and ended with a neighbor lifting a coffee cup across a yard. I think about what it costs to stay. Not financially, though that cost was real, and I will be honest with you. There were nights when I ran the numbers and they didn't work, when I sat with the possibility that the right rational decision was to take the offer and go. I think about what it costs emotionally, the daily decision to hold ground when the ground is being taken from under you incrementally, deliberately by people who have calculated exactly how much pressure it takes to make a person give up. I think about the fact that I did not do it alone. Evelyn Brooks, who had straightened her shoulders at her own kitchen table and asked, "What are we going to do?" Not "What are you going to do?" but "we." Calvin and Ruth Ann Patterson, who could have stayed quiet and finished a sale they didn't want. James Whitfield, who sat at a stranger's table and went through every notice one by one. Dana Reeves, who had crossed a street she didn't have to cross because she had looked at a situation and decided it was her business, even though by every conventional measure it wasn't. To Sean, age 8, who had asked if my house was okay with the full confidence of someone who expected the answer to be yes. My father, who told me a long time ago not to forget what was mine. I haven't. If this story meant something to you, if any part of it landed where you live, please hit the like button and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one I promise you don't want to miss. And drop me a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one of them, and I mean that. You're not watching alone either. Take care of yourselves and take care of what's yours.